Welcome to Tabletop Tommies. I'm Jonny,
And I'm Phil.
and in this episode, we're talking about the Army of the Partisans, or how to take partisans in bolt action. For anyone who's waiting for the Netherlands, don't worry, we're indexing them under T for the, so we'll get to them eventually, just not today. The Partisans were one of the most interesting V2 armies, I'd say. Would you agree, Phil?
Yeah, I would. I think they got really good with some of the campaign books. So the US D-Day book added some extra units which you could take in a generic reinforced platoon, like the Mackie squads where you could drop the snipers in, that sort of thing. So it'd be interesting to see what is going on in V3.
Yeah, that was really cool having snipers as part of a squad, and it's something that we haven't seen in V3 yet, and I do hope we see a revival of at some point, especially now that snipers aren't what they once were. It might get some more sniper rifles on the table, but for anyone who wasn't familiar with V2 Partisans, the Army special rules were they had fieldcraft, but not the fieldcraft that we now know and love. They had a different rule called fieldcraft, which meant that you could start the game in ambush. Additionally, you also got current day fieldcraft, which is that on the first turn, you could treat rough ground and obstacles as open ground for the purposes of movement, for your infantry specifically. They also had infiltration, which again, same name, different rule. When outflanking, they didn't suffer the -1, so basically behind enemy lines. And the one that everyone loved the most, I think, or hated the most, depending on whether you suffered because of it, was the hidden bomb. So at the start of the game, the partisan player would put down 3 markers to represent bombs, and the first enemy unit that moved to within 6 inches of the counter would have to roll a dice. On a 1 to 3, nothing happened, and you removed the token. A 4 or 5, nothing happened, but the token stayed, and the next unit who approached it had to test again. But on a 6, the unit was hit with a basically a 4-inch HE template. So they'd suffer hits, pins at 4 plus pen. So worth avoiding that one for the 1 in 6 chance of getting the squad wrecked.
Yeah, it was a really nice special rule, and it did mean you had to think if you were playing against partisans, you had to think about were you willing to risk it? Obviously, the tactic used to be to put them at choke points on the board or to put them next to objectives and that sort of thing if you were playing as the partisans. So that was a nice little one they had in V2.
Yeah, it was great for like blocking off bridges and stuff, which would slow it. Your opponent basically had to choose, do I go the fast route that's dangerous or do I go the slow route? And it was a lot of fun, to be honest. Wasn't particularly overpowered or underpowered. It was just a nice, fun rule. So hopefully they kept some fun rules for V3, did the Phil?
Almost. So they've kept the first three that you read out. So underneath the title of Battlefield Knowledge, you can start units in ambush in turn one. Obviously, take a dice out if you do so. They all have fieldcraft as well in the first turn of the game, and when they're outflanking, they ignore the -1 modifier. So 3 of the 4 rules are carried over. They have, however, lost the bombs rule, which is a real shame.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What they do get is the home country rule, which is effectively the same as the Bulgarian and Hungarian rule, whereby opposition's snipers, observers, and spotters cannot use the special deployment rules, and they must be deployed like the rest of the force. And enemies cannot outflank, but must always come in from their own table edge when arriving from reserve. So you've lost the bombs, but you have gained the ability to stop people forward deploying, infiltrating, and also outflanking.
Yeah, it's a shame because we've lost the fun rule. Now,
Yeah.
the reason I was quite keen to talk about partisans today is because if we do start to see lots of Finns on the table at tournaments, this could be an anti-Finnish force potentially. Now, the Hungarians, when I played them with my Finns, they had this rule and it proved very effective at stopping me getting to them, basically.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if the partisans have, because obviously the Hungarians basically have access to all the German units. It'll be interesting to see if the partisans are as good as the Hungarians as a counter-Finnish force.
That ability to negate outflanking is huge when you're playing against Hungarians, Bulgarians, and so on. So, yes, we'll find out now, won't we?
Yeah, so jumping into units, I think the HQs are basically as standard, aren't they? What you'd expect for partisans.
Yeah, so you get your officer. Obviously, you also get the liaison officer, which effectively is an forward air observer. So that's a nice little bonus if you want to take that.
Oh, that's interesting. So it doesn't count as an artillery observer.
No, it's an air observer. It's the same in V2 or V1 and V2. Yeah, it just represents the SOE who, certainly with the case of the French partisans, was parachuted in and working alongside them and calling in air support.
Cool. So not much to report there. Should we jump into infantry? Because I think there's some interesting stuff here.
There are only two options, but within those two options, you have quite a few. So your basic partisan squad can be taken inexperienced, regular, or veteran, and that's the normal 7, 10, or 13 points. That comes with 5 men as base. You can add up to 15 men. So if you really wanted to, you could take a 20-man veteran unit of partisans. We often saw big units of inexperienced partisans in V2. I'm not sure if you're really going to take a Death Star 20-man veteran unit, but you might.
No, you've lost the reason why people used to do it in V2, which is where you could give them shirker and then you couldn't give them shirker anymore. But you could give them pistols to reduce the cost, and so you could take a really cheap 20-man blob with tough fighter, no less, as
Yes.
well.
Yeah, so we obviously with pistols are not giving you tough fighter anymore, and to be fair, you don't actually have the option of reducing down to pistols now. So you may replace up to 3 with a shotgun at plus 3 points. Any man may replace their rifle with a submachine gun, so you can still take a 20-man SMG inexperienced squad if you like. It's going to be expensive, 140 points, but it's going to be deadly if it ever connects within point blank range.
Where it's 140 plus the 80 points for the SMGs, isn't it? So it's 220.
You're right. I was doing 7 times 20. Yeah.
So 220 points. Oof.
Oof. Yeah. Okay, so that's even more expensive. You could take one LMG if you want. You could have one Panzerfaust. You can equip them all with anti-tank grenades. Interestingly, if no additional men are purchased, the basic 5-man squad may be given the engineer special rule for plus 5 points. So that's the plus 1 point per man. So you could take inexperienced engineers using this partisan squad entry.
And I know why they've done that, because otherwise, when we get to team weapons, we see they've got a flamethrower. And if you didn't have engineers, you can't run your flamethrower. It
Mm.
doesn't feel awfully thematic to have engineers in a partisan force necessarily.
Yeah, I guess under the V3 sort of setup where you only had one flamethrower, for example, and you didn't have engineers in the partisan force, that kind of made sense where they captured a flamethrower and they're using it, but it has some negatives as we'll find out. Yeah, now running little 5-man squads of regular or veteran or even inexperienced engineers maybe not so thematic for partisans. Obviously, they've added it so that you can take the flamethrower later on.
Yeah, I do wonder if we just got rid of the flamethrower team and put the flamethrower in the engineers, it would make more sense thematically, because as you say, it's like a 5-man rifle squad has captured
Mm,
a flamethrower and they're
yeah.
just sort of messing around with it. Um, the thing that caught my eye here is the shotgun. So the problem I'm having with SMGs in V3 is they're just too expensive. 4 points, I think, is too expensive to add as well. A lot of the reason you add an SMG is just to make a few tough fighters to put people off charging you. The adding 3 for 12 points, it's just a little bit too much. The shotguns, however, with basically V2 costing of an SMG, 18-inch range, gives you that assault rule. I'm tempted by that.
Even though you're not getting the extra shot. So even with a shotgun, you're only getting 1 dice rather than 2.
Yeah, because also the other benefit is if you're taking them inexperienced, there is a chance you get a super six. If you've
Mm-hmm.
moved, got the pin, and inexperienced. Whereas with the shotguns, you'll never hit on worse than a six. And so little 5-man squads for 44 points with 3 shotguns feels both very thematic, that it's just farmers grabbing what they've got on hand,
Mm.
basically. But also, actually, that's pretty competitive because 5 men with 3 tough fighters, like, that's a risky charge for anything less than about 6 men, isn't it?
Yeah, and especially if you're keeping them on objectives, for example, you're going to think twice about clearing them off an objective through charging, if particularly if it's in difficult ground and they're getting defended position. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a shame that Faust are so expensive, because if Faust were about 10 points, and so for 69 points, I could have a Faust and 3 shotguns on a 5-man regular squad. That would be the perfect objective camper.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of, looking back to V2, essentially the partisan squad in V3 gives you the options that the rule book did in V1 and V2. So you haven't got the extra stuff that came in the D-Day US sectors book, which is not a surprise because we haven't really seen any of those extra units from campaign books in V2 appearing in the PDFs or the main rule book for V3. It'll be interesting to see what happens when partisans have their own book or have their own entry within a book down the line. So.
Yeah, I'm really hoping to put some effort in rather than just what we got with Germany, where it's basically just the big rule book plus the units to be spread out into additional units. Oh, and if you're veteran, you can be stubborn. Um, so I'm really hoping we go back to a fun version of Partisans rather than just something that does the job, because it feels like we're leaning as an addition towards getting the job done rather than having fun.
I think with partisans as well, they always struck me that they were because they were so utilitarian, and it was effectively like these partisans can represent French partisans or Yugoslavian partisans or Polish partisans or whatever. But I would imagine, my history of partisan actions within World War II is not the strongest, but I would imagine there were significant differences or flavoursome differences across the resistance movements within occupied countries throughout World War II. So it would be nice to see an element of flavour and so on. You do see that in the compendium. You've got the Bielski brothers in the compendium, which is sort of leaning towards that. But yeah, it would be nice if we had a little bit of differences down the line. When they appear in a book of some form.
Yeah, my thoughts as we were talking about there was what would be really nice is if we get a partisan book, a bit like how Armies of France and Allies is arranged, where you have your core partisan list, and then you have different parts of the war. So you have like the Polish partisans, the French partisans, the Bulgarian partisans, or whatever, and then each of those like army lists is just an adaptation of the main list effectively where like it adds stuff on, it takes stuff away. That would be a really brilliant book to release as a single Armies of book, I think. Just Armies of Partisans during the war. And you can make it really thick because there's lots of history you can throw in that book. And I think it would be it'd be a top seller. I think most people would buy that book because it would be interesting historically and it would give you loads of options to play with.
Yeah, you'd get some really unique armies on the tabletop doing it that way. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the other infantry squad though?
Yes, so the other thing you can take is a cavalry squad. So this is the same as the previous option. So it's a regular cavalry squad, 5 men on horses for 65 points. You can add up to 5 more for plus 13 points each. So 10 points for the regular and 3 points for the cavalry. Any man can have a submachine gun for plus 4 points. So 17 points for a SMG riding man on horse. And you can give them one man an LMG if you wish.
Yeah, don't do that. The regular cavalry, brilliant. Don't give them weapon upgrades though, because you can't shoot them from horseback.
Yeah.
And so you have to dismount, wasting those 3 points in order to shoot them.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to do that, you put the SMGs in a like take the normal squad on foot, put them in a truck. You then get a second dice for the same number of points. But it's really nice having regular cavalry in a minors list.
Yeah, and certainly, well, not certainly, but certainly have seen, cavalry squads in partisan lists previously, and even even recently at Beachhead we saw, the Hungarian list that Andy had with cavalry. They're useful for nipping out, and they're useful for buzzing around and being a nuisance. So, not necessarily suggesting an all partisan cavalry force, but having one or two small squads to harass and harangue and so on could be a good idea.
Oh yeah, especially with that DZE change that we talked about in the last episode about the FAQ, as in the change from V2 to V3. Obviously, the FAQ just clarified what the change was, but now you can come on 12 inches up the flank and then run 18 inches up from there. You can end turn one 30 inches up the board effectively, and then if someone's sort of put an artillery piece or a mortar on the flank, you're ready to charge them at the start of next turn.
Yeah, definitely. There's a nice little interaction there.
Yeah. Team weapons.
Yeah, team weapons as expected. So you can get a machine gun team, medium machine gun, can't upgrade it to heavy. You've got access to light or medium mortars, and obviously the medium mortar can take a spotter. You've got your sniper team. You can take an inexperienced sniper team, which is interesting. I guess it's thematic. Anti-tank team. So you start off with a rifle, anti-tank rifle. You can upgrade it to a Piat for plus 15 points, or to a bazooka for plus 35 points. And then you get your flamethrower team. which is slightly cheaper because it has the poor maintenance rule, which means that you suffer a -1 modifier to the roll when seeing if you run out of fuel. So with the changes to V3, you're running out 50% of the time.
Yeah, in V2, this rule was not that big a deal. You got a 5 point reduction and you ran out of fuel 1 and 3 times rather than 1 and 6 times. As you say now, it's 50-50, but only a 5 point reduction. And your engineers aren't really anything special anyway. It's probably not worth doing, I would say. Um, there might be a use case for it, but I think there's probably other ways to do that last resort weapon, basically.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a last resort weapon, obviously not against vehicles, but I'd be looking at an SMG squad. If you're holding back an engineer squad with a flamethrower to clear a unit off an objective, we'll invest those points in a regular squad or even an inexperienced squad, but stack a load of SMGs into them.
Yeah, I might even take a Faust, um, just one Faust to hold back tanks, because it is really hard to justify taking another lieutenant, another 10 men, just to have access to a flamethrower that runs out half the time.
Yeah, yeah,
It's really hard to justify. Jumping back to what you were saying about the veterancy of the teams,
yeah. Mm,
it is quirky because the sniper can be all three, which is interesting. It's like you've given a sniper rifle to someone who's got no idea what they're doing. But equally, the counter side, you might have sort of like an ex-serviceman who's was an expert marksman who's come out of retirement basically, and so that kind of makes sense to me. The rest of them are limited to regular, but weirdly, the one that caught my eyes, you can have a veteran mortar team, and I don't really understand why they've given it to the mortar team, but not to say the machine gun team.
yeah. And I'm just cross-referencing back to V2 or V1, and they were only inexperienced or regular previously. So it's not as though they've just taken across the original entry without any changes. There's a deliberate choice there to add it in as a veteran option.
Yeah, I think it's a copy and paste of the other miners PDFs. That's my suspicion that what they've done is they've got
Mm,
their sort of their standard team weapon set. You copy and paste it over for each miner and then edit it. So they've added that rule to the flamethrower, and someone's missed the fact that they've it's basically it's slipped through that you can have a veteran mortar team because if you're using that argument of like, oh, maybe it's an ex-serviceman, then that would apply to all your team weapons kind of thing. That they'd all like you've got just as much chance of finding someone who used to be an artilleryman as you have someone who was an ex
yeah.
machine gunner. And so I think that's just a slip in the copy and paste, which I don't know. Are you going to use it, the veteran mortar team, in the short term?
Well, I mean, I was going to say probably not. As a light mortar team, you might just to make it a bit more survivable.
I tell you what, until that latest FAQ,
Mm-hmm.
having one that was veteran with the veteran spotter, and then the rest of them using the veteran spotter would have been a nice way to do it. Now, I think you just take them all regular since you haven't to take a spot off each one anyway if you're taking mediums.
Mm. Let's talk about inexperienced snipers. So the sniper rule in V3
Hmm.
says you benefit from an additional +1 modifier to hit.
So you'd be hitting on the basic four because the inexperienced and sniper rule cancel out.
Yes. Now, the only reason I'm mentioning this is there was a whole debate that raised its head every probably 3 or 4 months. We'd have this debate in within the community about inexperienced snipers in V2 because I believe the wording in V2 was they always hit on a whatever it was, as opposed to they suffered a negative modifier.
It was the wording was different. So in
Mm,
V2, it was you ignored modifiers. And then the argument was,
that was right.
does that
Yes.
include the inexperienced modifier?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think the specific wording was something like you ignore modifiers for pins and well, just I don't know actually. I don't know what the specific wording was. But anyway, I think that wording was what caused it. Now the wording's a lot clearer because the sniper
Yes.
isn't ignoring modifiers, it's gaining +1.
But also having a -1 if you take it inexperienced. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's been streamlined. I think the other thing that's helped is
Mm,
because we've streamlined the to hit, because now we're not modifying to hits for cover.
yeah.
And that's the big thing. I think the shame for me here is I think there is an army. I think there is an army possibility of taking lots of inexperienced snipers. I think that'd be really cool. But ironically, you're quite limited by the slots. Because I mean, how
Yeah,
many snipers can you take?
one per rifle platoon. I don't think you can take them in a recce platoon. So you certainly can't take them in heavy weapons platoon. So you'd be having to take them in. Yeah, one. You have to take a lieutenant or an officer and two squads in a rifle platoon just to access a sniper.
And that's really weird to me because everything else has got like slots coming out of its ears, but the sniper is one of the few units that has one in one platoon.
Yeah, I'm just going to double check the recce.
I'm just looking
Yeah,
at it
yeah,
now,
yeah, yeah. You can take an FAO in an anti-tank team. I was aware of that, but no, there's no sniper in a recce platoon.
which is weird, isn't it? Because
Mm.
you can take three anti-tank slots in a heavy weapons platoon,
Mm-hmm.
which is why like you can have AT rifles coming out of your ears.
Yeah.
It's a shame you can't have a lot of snipers because they aren't good now. And the one place they might be good would be if you did something like having them in squads or like just have lots of them as
Mm.
part of a platoon structure.
We might see something in a book down the line when the Partisans come out where they have some special rule which allows them to take snipers into other platoons or multiples in a platoon. Who knows? So
Yeah, check back in 2027.
yes, yeah. TBC, depending on the schedule. Yeah. Okay. Should we move on to weapons?
Yeah, let's move on
Yeah.
to
Artillery.
artillery pieces, which they haven't got a lot of them, but they've got sort of everything you need, I would say.
I mean, if you like light things, they have everything you need. So you can have a light howitzer, a light AA gun, or a light anti-tank gun. That's it.
What more do you need, I guess?
I mean, we've said this before, like medium and heavy howitzers we're not seeing much of at the moment because they are expensive in V3 compared to their utility in V2, especially with the reduction in pins for a medium howitzer, for example, because of the template size. So I think a light howitzer is perfectly fine. You can't take a spotter with it, so you'd need to utilize the spotter from your mortar. Um, Light AA gun, that makes sense. I mean, I can't imagine partisans regularly stealing heavy AA guns and towing them around, but some of the lighter ones perhaps, and the light AT gun similarly as well. It
Isn't
does.
oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say the light AT gun also has the two men rather than three men, and this was one of those quirks in V2, wasn't it? That partisan AT guns had fewer crewmen, and that's still the case. But you're not paying anything less. You're still paying 50 points for a regular two-man one.
I was going to ask you about exactly that because that struck me as peculiar straight out of the gate. And in the V2 version, I always assumed it was a bit of a mistake that either it was intended to be a points reduction or it was intended to have the same number of men.
Mm.
It hasn't been addressed here,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like it's an oversight again rather than anything else.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't ever think it got errata, did it, in V2 to clarify if it was meant to be two men or up to three men.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was one of those things where people weren't really taking them anyway, so no one was particularly kicking off about it.
Fair enough. But yeah, in terms of what you have a howitzer, you have an AA gun, you have an anti-tank gun. If you want to take artillery platoons, you have them. Yeah, 35 points for a regular AA gun on a rotating platform, which has got flak. That's great. So,
Yeah, it's not bad.
yeah.
Not bad at all. I think howitzer's direct firing might be the maneuver. That would be my thinking, just for the 2-inch template, get a few more men under it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Of those options, definitely. Yeah.
yeah. And then we get to what is a fun rule and
Mm.
hasn't been removed from us. And so we should spend some time on it, I think.
Yeah, so partisan vehicles. So you can take all the common vehicles from the V3 rulebook. So your transport options, your trucks and your small trucks, your light trucks and your bigger trucks and your civilian cars, all of that's still there. So go and have a look at the V3 rulebook for that. But yeah, the fun rule is the captured vehicles rule. So a partisan force may include any vehicle with a damage value up to and including 9 plus. So basically up to a medium tank. However, they must be purchased as inexperienced. and all armored vehicles, so in this case, anything of a damage value of 7, 8, or 9, have the unreliable special rule.
Yeah, what's nice here is there was always a bit of contention in V2 because this was written in V1. The rule was written from the armies of Germany and the armies of Italy and Axis supplement. I think you could steal your vehicles from. And
Yes.
then people kept trying to steal vehicles from other supplements,
Yeah.
other sources, and it all got a bit messy. I like here that it's any vehicle because that means you can represent partisans from all around the world, and there's no messiness of is that an armies of Germany vehicle kind of thing. So that's nice, sort of future proofing long term. Interestingly, though, unreliable, no points
Yeah.
reduction.
So no points reduction. So this is going to potentially trigger those who are already slightly triggered by the Finns, because obviously the Finns have a built-in points reduction for their unreliable rule. There's nothing in the Partisan PDF to reduce the cost of those vehicles that you must take as unreliable, which is a shame.
Yeah, a good one for this. Because you have to take them in experience, it's going to affect you to hit roll. A good one for this in V2 was sort of multi-launcher vehicles, so things like a Panzerwerfer. I always thought
Mm.
was a cool way to go, or something that was shooting indirect. I'm not sure anymore because the Panzerwerfer got the questionable fire and platform rule or whatever it is. That means you can't move and shoot it. And so maybe something like a Marder or something with a howitzer that isn't very expensive might be the way to go here.
Yeah. I was thinking of taking the Soviet Brunetica if it comes out in the Armies of Soviet book, just because the partisans have captured a riverboat. But no, in all seriousness, yeah, something like a howitzer where the -1 doesn't matter because if you're going to use it for indirect fire, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you took like one of our favorites, the soft skins with a howitzer on the back, like a little porty, that would be quite cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah, or something with a ton of machine guns, so that you're throwing a lot of dice and you're not that fussed about the negative because of it being inexperienced and so on. Maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking about filling gaps as well. I was considering because you don't have a lot of anti-tank,
Mm.
and so I want something with sort of strength 3 or greater was my sort of thought process there.
That's why you want a Brunetica.
Now, the other thing that's interesting is I believe you could only capture one vehicle in V2. My understanding now is I can capture as many vehicles as I want.
Yes, correct on both fronts. Yeah.
Well, that's quite cool.
Yeah. So I can have a fleet of German captured vehicles with my partisans if I wanted. Yeah.
That's interesting thematically. Like, did they
Mm.
raid the depot and steal all the tanks?
Yeah, I mean it's a consequence, isn't it, of having the V3 selectors with something that I guess made sense thematically in V2, but maybe is a little bit less or more loose, sorry, in V3 now.
Yeah, because you have to have at least two vehicles to have one vehicle, don't you?
Mm.
So, and they don't have any other options. So I guess our choice was a limit of two or no limit at all.
Yeah. I'm spitballing here, but it's a shame you don't get something like a civilian car with recce and a machine gun. Like that's not a captured vehicle. That is a civilian car. You've got hold of a Bren gun, or an MG 34, 42, whatever, and you've got a particularly skilled driver who can do escape moves. That doesn't need to be inexperienced and so on. That could just be a standard vehicle, perhaps. It's a shame that kind of thing. Or I mean, maybe motorcycle and sidecar, something like that.
Oh, that'd be
Um,
cool. Yeah.
mm,
I mean, the thing that could have happened here, if we'd had some forethought, is in the common vehicles, the common transports, if you'd given the Jeeps the option to replace the transport capacity with a medium machine gun, then
and
you've got
therefore,
exactly this.
and shifted it as into an armored car, so it drops into the armored platoon slot. Yes, that would negate the need to have separate entries in the partisan PDF if that was something they went down the route of. Yeah.
Yeah, equally though, this is quite fun that it's giving us the option to take five vehicles in a
Mm.
partisan force, which is something we've never seen before. So we've lost the bombs,
Yeah.
but I've gained up to five vehicles. The problem is that unreliable rule just really. I don't know if you're better off just running the home nation of the vehicle you're trying to steal.
Yeah, but then if you've got more officers, haven't you? And we talked about this with the Finns. Like, yes, you get the unreliable rule, so you take that extra pin each time. You take a pin from a firing unit. Um, but the more officers, in theory, allow you to sort of negate or certainly counter slightly, the unreliable effect.
Yeah, but
Maybe,
then counterpoint. When we're running the unreliable finish vehicles, let's say, we're taking them at least regular,
yeah,
which
if not
means we're
veteran.
never hitting worse than a six.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
if you're inexperienced, your vehicles, even though they've passed the test, hurrah, are hitting on a super six,
Yeah.
unless you go indirect. So that brings us back to all the way around to perhaps the maneuver is to use it to build an artillery battery, basically.
Yeah, on wheels or tracks. Yeah, or both if it's a half track. Yeah,
Yeah. Or take five Stugs.
yeah, yeah.
If you take the Finnish Stugs as well, they're cheaper.
That is very true. Yes,
Oh,
only
hold on a minute.
185. Go on.
There's an idea. If I steal a Finnish vehicle that's already got
Yeah.
the unreliable discount, then it's already got the unreliable discount.
So this would be what Soviet partisans or Finnish partisans who have actually sided with the Soviets and then stolen from their colleagues. Okay.
Yeah, that works. And then I can run
Yeah.
my Komsomolets,
Yeah.
but I can have the no outflank rule to stop the Finns. So basically, I get all the perks of being Finnish, apart
Yeah.
from the counterpartio, but I counter the Finns as well.
Stay tuned for Johnny's next tournament build.
Oh, I've just realized I can't have the Komsomolets, can I? Because there's this captured vehicle thing specifically for the tank slot.
No, it just says
Can
vehicle.
have any vehicle.
You can take captured transports. Yeah.
Oh, lads, here we go. I'm
So
going to have
yeah,
horses and Komsomolets.
it's a shame they don't have the is it the aero fin.
I know
That
exactly what you
that
mean. The
would be
little ski
cool.
fella with a fan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be cool. Yeah, yeah.
Is that not in the big rule book for the Soviets?
Not yet. No, not I'm aware of. I mean, to be fair, I haven't looked hard, but I don't think it is. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think I've hit on something here, which is to play Finnish Partisans.
Yeah, if Warlord, if you're listening, this is our wish list. Please, could you, let me take a Bronekita as a captured Finnish partisan vehicle with some of those aerofins. Yeah, you can't take them. I've just checked. Yeah.
I think the problem is it's a time limited force. I'm expecting that the Finns will get some sort of errata at some point,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like up in the air. It could be 2 months, could be 3 months. I imagine when Armies of US comes out and then that gets immediately errated, that's when we'll also errata the Finns points to bring them back in line. But having said that, it's not like the finish lists that went to Beachhead and to other tournaments are just annihilating people. So
No.
it's not like they need a very, very swift correction. Um, and so it could be slightly longer, I guess,
Yeah, I'd agree. There could not the auto win that people are talking about or fearing. Absolutely, yeah.
especially if everyone brings them.
Yes, yeah, because they just counter each other one way or the other. Yeah.
Phil, I've noticed that a lot of the finished vehicles you can't take inexperienced. So does that mean that I wouldn't be able to steal them?
Rules is written, yes. So if you can't take it as an experience, then you're not going to be able to include it in a partisan force. So actually, your Finnish partisan list might not actually work.
No, it doesn't work at all anymore. It also severely limits the fun options that I thought were on the table. Never mind. Better luck next time.
Back to the drawing board.
Indeed.
Anyway, should we get back to partisans?
Yeah, I think we've covered most of it. I mean, overall, I'd say they're not as fun as V2 in some regards, but they're more fun in other regards. And so possibly worth trying out. I've now got my eye on trying them out, to be honest. What about you?
I thought about them in V2 to the point of actually kind of scoping out what would it look like and how much would it cost me and so on. I didn't take the plunge completely, but certainly in V2, I was thinking of the guerrilla squads, which effectively are the veterans, because you could put them with SMGs. You can do that now. Having some of the cavalry as well, particularly in V2, where the cavalry were really good, and then the whole pistolero inexperienced blob, with pistols. You can't quite do that build, but I think there's a really interesting, combination of units here. I was going to say as well, what we are seeing, I mean, certainly we saw it at the English Open, the Chinese list at the English Open used the partisan selector in order to represent the Chinese force, because we were only allowing official warlord lists for warfare last year for the English Open. So it kind of serves as a stand-in potentially for some of those nations that don't have releases yet, like China, Slovakia, and so on.
Yeah. I think when I was doing Sea Lion, I bought loads of civilians to be like the Germans in disguise, and my plan long term was to play partisans with them, but I never got around to it because just the amount of models, because I wanted to run sort of like 20-man pistol squads. I never managed to pad my army out to the extent that it was worth taking.
Mm.
Now I'm not sure on them. It's that inexperienced and reliable for all your vehicles, and not a lot of AT elsewhere. I think if Fausts were cheaper, I could see myself running a partisan force because I'd have some anti-tank.
Mm.
I don't know what. I think I would do partisans for fun, like if I was going down the club.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't fancy taking it to a tournament because you just know at some point you'll face like 8 armored vehicles and you've
yeah,
got like 4 light howitzers, and
yeah.
suddenly you just know that it's going to be very easy to get steamrolled.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It'd be interesting, those who played Partisans in V2, are they doing so in V3, and how are they finding it, and what are they doing, if anything, which is different as well?
Absolutely. And I think if I could take loads of snipers again, there's like a couple of different tweaks that would allow me to build something really fun
Hmm.
that would push me to partisans. But right now, we're a little bit sloppy. And the thing that we haven't got in army books that I was really hoping we'd get would be modifiers to the platoon selectors.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping by the time we get to partisans that enough thought's been put in that we do actually get a partisan specific selector, because they don't need an engineering selector. And so take away their engineering selector and give them something else. Let them take the one flamethrower in the rifle platoon, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and let them take more sniper rifles or something. That's what I'd like to see for the partisans, alongside that big fat book with partisans around the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The flamethrower sits in the heavy weapons platoon for a partisan, for example, but it's a limited slot resource. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. One
Yeah.
per heavy, because the heavy weapons platoon just seems to be where we put things we don't know where else to put them.
Well, yes, but it's where you put the heavy weapons, hence the name. But yeah.
Yeah.
So do let us know if you're playing Partisans in V3, or if you used to play them in V2, but you haven't played them in V3, why not? If you're interested in playing Partisans, there's so many options out there in terms of kit bashing and all that kind of stuff. Have a look at our Firestorm and Wayland Games affiliate links, because you can get some alternative manufacturers from Warlord Games to do some really interesting partisan or partisan-like models.
Yeah, War Games Atlantic would be the one that I'd shout out because I like plastic kits. And so that's what I'm going to be looking at. As ever, thank you for listening. Please do all the usual things: share, like, subscribe, drop us a comment. Ta-ta for now.
Ta-ta for now.